Hello everyone, and welcome to the 176th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Lorne Malvo from Fargo. Many of you enjoyed the episode I made covering the Fargo film that I released last month, so I took that as a sign that it was about time to cover another popularly requested character from the same universe. Now, I'd only started watching the Fargo show recently for this video, and once I saw Lorne in action, he instantly became one of my new favorite villains, which is no surprise considering another Coen Brothers villain that Lorne resembles, Anton Chigurh, is also one of my, and I'm sure many of your favorites too. Though not quite as mysterious as Anton, Lorne is as much a brutal anomaly as he is. And in this video, we're going to attempt to understand how someone develops into a creature like Lorne Malvo, running through all the hints we're given in this show that might clue us in on some of the horrid details of his person, as we examine all the intricacies of the actions he takes throughout this story. Now, this is the part where I typically tell you that we have some business to take care of before we go any further, and we do. However, I am especially excited about this sponsor, and I think it's one of the coolest things I've seen come out in recent years, so I encourage you to stick around for a minute to hear about a new app that just launched. Love reading but hate carrying books to work? Appreciate good animated stories, but too tired from the commute? And you keep falling victim to endless doom scrolling? If only there was a way to read-watch cool animation and replace doom scrolling, all during your commute. Introducing Storyverse. Storyverse combines short story prose with stylistic animation to provide you with a new way to experience stories. All these stories are original and exclusive to Storyverse, and they're catered to mature audiences with complex themes and deep character development. Also, all read-watch experiences are uniquely created by talented writers and animators from around the world. So go on, download Storyverse now. I mean it, go download it now. Now, without further ado, let's begin. So in order to follow along with what we're about to discuss, it's important that you know who Lorne Malvo is and what he's about, as even if you've seen the show, a little refresher might be helpful going forward. Lorne Malvo is a hitman who's seemingly based out of my home city of Reno, Nevada. Lorne is highly proficient at his job, showing a high level of cunning and intellect as he outmaneuvers nearly everyone he encounters. However, the evil of Lorne Malvo doesn't just stem from his profession, as Lorne is fond of taking time out of his busy schedule to play out some insidious designs of a more personal nature. At varying points in this story, we find Lorne committing horrific acts of corruption, murder, or torment that have nothing to do with his profession. He murders a man named Sam Hess for the sake of another, Lester Nygaard, who's a pushover that never stands up for himself, and turns Lester into a killer in his own right, which sets off the main events of this story. We see him convincing a young man to urinate in his mother's gas tank, and then afterwards calling her to notify her that he's doing so, to cause as much pain in that situation as he possibly can. We see him utterly destroying a man's life, Stavros Milos, by replacing his prescription with Adderall, killing his dog, and sending manufactured biblical plagues to haunt him in order to blackmail him. We also see him telling children who move into the house where Lester killed his wife that people were murdered there and that the house could be haunted. And he seems to do all these things for no other reason than a twisted desire to do so. But the trick here is understanding why Lorne is who he is and does what he does. Now, part of the allure of Lorne Malvo is that he's an enigma, a walking death machine whose only reason for committing murder and tormenting others seems to be his desire to do so. And as much as a character like Lorne doesn't really need an extensive backstory in order to be an effective villain, there's actually something Lorne indirectly says when he's having Dawn threaten Stavros that I think reveals much about why Lorne is who he is. Once upon a time, there was a little boy. He was born in a field and raised in the woods. In the winters, he would freeze. In the summer, he would boil. He knew the name of every stinging insect. At night, he would look at the lights in the houses, and he would want. Why was he outside, and they in? Why was he so hungry, and they fed? It should be me, he said, and out of the darkness the wolves came whispering. Now, there are a few times where Lorne uses parables from the Bible or other stories to make his points, and in this moment, it appears that he's doing much the same thing. However, this seems to be a Lorne Malvo original, but more specifically, it seems that this could be a nod to Lorne's possible backstory. And there's one reason in particular why we might be able to make the assumption that the little boy Lorne is talking about in this story is himself, Lorne's obsession with animals. There are several times in this story where Lorne is trying to make a point, and he chooses to make said point through allegories and analogies involving animals. When Lorne is talking to Lester in the diner after he's killed Sam Hess, he tells him that we used to be gorillas, and that all we had was what we could take and defend. After Gus arrests Lorne and he's released, Gus decides to confront Lorne, and he asks him how he can lie so easily. to which Lorne responds with a riddle, asking Gus why the human eye can see more shades of green than any other color. And the answer to that question is because our simian ancestors needed to be able to differentiate the many different colors of green in the jungle so they could spot predators more easily. When Lorne is driving Stavros to his home, he starts a conversation with him about St. Lawrence, who was burned alive by the Romans. Lorne asks if Stavros knows why the Romans killed him, to which Stavros responds that it was because he was a Christian. Lorne offers him a different theory though. He states that he believes the Romans killed him because the Romans were raised by wolves. And what do wolves do? They hunt and they kill, as is their nature. Later in the conversation, he also comments on the Romans' murder of Jesus, saying that the Romans, who again were supposedly raised by wolves, killed a man that turned water into wine because there are no saints in the animal kingdom, just breakfast and dinner. Lorne is alluding to the Roman foundation myth here, the tale of Romulus and Remus, part of which has to do with the two boys' abandonment and subsequent salvation through the god Tiberinus, and the she-wolf that suckled them in a cave known as the Lupercal, near where the city of Rome was founded. In the same conversation, Lorne also comments on the Jungle Book, saying that the reason he never bought its story is because a boy who was raised by wolves then became friends with a panther and a bear rather than becoming a killer, which to Lorne is ludicrous. Now there are two more stories that Lorne tells involving animals, but it's important that we discuss those a little later on. So between these 4 examples that Lorne gives us, what do they all have in common? Wolves, people being raised by wolves, predators, and our origination in the animal kingdom. But the most important thing to note about these examples is that all of them can be related in some way to the story that Lorne has Don tell Stavros over the phone. Now everyone is more than welcome to use analogies and allegories as they see fit, but the presence of such allusions alongside this mysterious story causes me to believe that this is no mere preference for animal-based comparisons. And in fact, I think it's fair to assume that he prefers using these types of analogies is because Lorne Malvo was actually raised by wolves. But aside from Lorne's story and his animal-based analogies, there's a couple visual hints we're given that might have been included to point us towards making this connection. When Lorne is buying a police scanner from his black market contact, there's documentary-style footage of wolves playing in his van, and when Lorne is about to meet his maker at the end of this story, a lone wolf makes an appearance just outside the cottage he's holed up at. Either these things are coincidences, or they're meant to be subtle nods to Lorne's true nature. Also, here's a little bit of a fun fact. It's unknown if Lorne is just based out of Reno, or if he's actually from there. But either way, the University of Nevada Reno's mascot is the Wolf Pack, so maybe this is another nod to Lorne's character, but that's probably a stretch. Now, assuming Lorne was raised by wolves might seem like a stretch as well, but there is some basis for this notion in reality. There are likely numerous undocumented cases of children being raised by various animals that we're unaware of. But as for specific cases of kids being raised by wolves, there are currently 6 different examples we can look to. The first 3 chronologically are the Hessian wolf children, 3 children from different families who were found in the first half of the 14th century that were raised by Eurasian wolves in the forests of Hesse in what is now Germany. The first boy, who was abandoned at the age of 3 and found when he was 7, was eventually integrated back into society and welcomed into the court of Prince Henry of Langenstein. And though he became well adjusted in time, he was reported to have said he still enjoyed the company of wolves, more so than people. The second boy was far too feral and died shortly after being captured. The third boy was also able to rejoin society, and depending on the source, he either died shortly after he was discovered or lived to the age of 80. Next is a boy who wandered into the town of Hanspur in Uttar Pradesh, India in 1843, when he was around 12 years old, who seemed to have been raised by wolves. He learned to walk upright and understand hand signs, but he never spoke. Eventually, he was recognized by his parents when he was spotted at a bazaar he frequented, but his fate afterwards is unknown. Another boy by the name of Dina Sanichar was also discovered to have been raised by wolves in Uttar Pradesh in 1872 at the age of 6, this time in a cave near the city of Agra. Dina lived with humans for over 20 years, and he even picked up a smoking habit, but he never learned to speak and was seriously impaired for his entire life. Now, in these 5 examples, you'll find a mixture of success and failure in regard to reintegration back into human society, and we could very well look to the 2 Hessian boys who managed to do so successfully and compare their lives to Lorne's. But the final known case of a person being raised by wolves is the one that we're going to pay special attention to, and that's the case of Marcos Rodriguez Pantoja of Spain. And to do so, we'll use an overview of his story that can be found on Wikipedia, which will be more than sufficient enough for what we're trying to accomplish here. Bear in mind, though, that this entry has a lot of Spanish words in it, and I'm probably going to pronounce some of them wrong. Marcos was born in Añora, Spain, in the province of Cordoba. He migrated with his parents to Madrid, where his mother died giving birth to her 8th child, who died shortly thereafter when Marcos was 3 years old. His father then married another woman who already had a child from a previous marriage. His stepmother subjected him to cruel abuse while she was in charge. In the 1950s, they settled in Fuencaliente, Ciudad Real, in the Sierra Morena, where they dedicated themselves to the manufacture of coal. By 1954, Marcos had spent much of his young life being abused by his stepmother. That year, he was sold or delivered to a local landowner who put him under the care of a goat shepherd. The child was to serve as a future replacement for the shepherd, but he was abandoned to nature after his death. In 1965, the Civil Guard found him after 11 years, living in complete isolation from human beings and with the sole company of the wolves. The Civil Guard moved him to Fuencaliente by force, bound and gagged, as he howled and bit like a wolf. The police never brought charges against the father, who was still alive at the time, and when he recognized his son, he only reproached him for having lost his jacket. Nuns employed at a nearby hospital, along with a priest, taught him again the use of speech, how to dress, walk upright, and eat with cutlery. He was admitted to the Hospital de Convalecientes of the Vallejo Foundation in Madrid, until he was reintroduced as an adult to life in society. He was sent to Mallorca, where he lived in a hostel, paying with his work. He did military service and dedicated himself to work as a shepherd and in the hospitality industry. Some of his acquaintances took advantage of him financially very often through scamming and deception, as he suffered by having limited financial and cultural sense, given the many years he spent in complete isolation. After unstable living arrangements in Fuengirola, Malaga, where for a time he even lived in a cave, he moved to a village in the interior of Orense, Rante. There he was welcomed by Manuel Barandela Losada, a retired police officer. Marcos called him the Jefe and considered him to be family until his death. Currently, Marcos is sponsored by a Dutch family, being frequently invited by city councils, associations, and diverse organizations to give talks and narrate his experience. In addition, he has been interviewed in numerous television programs. In regards to the study of his case, the study of the case was carried out by the anthropologist and writer Gabriel Janer Manila, who between November 1975 and April 1976 interviewed Marcos Rodriguez in order to study the educational measures necessary for integration into society. The anthropologist stated that the causes of Marcos' abandonment were not fortuitous, but deliberate, and the result of a socioeconomic context of extreme poverty. The researcher also stressed that Marcos' survival was possible thanks to the basic skills acquired in the previous phase of his abandonment, as well as his extraordinary natural intelligence. During his isolation, the child learned the noises of the animals with which he lived and used them to communicate with them, while little by little, he abandoned human language. Once he was again immersed in a social environment, after his rescue by the Civil Guard, he made a slow readaptation to human customs, still manifesting an adulthood preference for life in the field and for animals, and he developed some animosity for the noise and smell of cities, considering that life with humans is worse than life with animals. He considers that the hardships he suffered once he was reintroduced into society could have been alleviated in large part if the state had intervened in time. If you're interested more in Marcos' story, there was actually a movie that was inspired by his life made in 2010, and it's called Entre Lobos, so check that out if you'd like to see a dramatization of Marcos' life. Now, aside from reintegrating into society and still being alive to this day, the most notable things about Marcos' story are the components of his person and upbringing that facilitated his survival with these wolves, as well as his successful rehabilitation, specifically the skills he developed when he was abandoned, as well as his heightened level of natural intelligence. I couldn't find anything to suggest that the creators of this series drew part of their inspiration for Lorne from Marcos' story, but if we apply what Marcos experienced to Lorne, who Lorne Malvo is makes all the more sense. Imagine for a moment that Lorne's story is nearly identical to Marcos's, only rather than being a Spaniard, he's an American, and instead of being reintegrated into society in a healthy way like Marcos was, Lorne definitely was not. Like Marcos, Lorne is exceptionally intelligent, and because he is rather well adjusted compared to the more severe cases we discussed, I'd say that Lorne was also abandoned at an age where he'd already learned to speak after he had experienced horrific abuse by his parents. And considering Lorne during a conversation with Lou Salverson points out his daughter's wedding photo, and then comments in a rather thoughtful manner about how one doesn't hang sad pictures of things like a mother crying, a father looking angry, or a kid with a black eye, I think childhood abuse and trauma are very much a part of Lorne Malvo's story. The main difference between Marcos and Lorne, though, is that Marcos was either able to ignore whatever hatred he felt towards humans for abandoning him, or he was able to forgive them for doing so and live a mostly well-adjusted and healthy life. But Lorne wasn't. Whatever Lorne went through was too much to forgive, and because at some point Lorne Malvo was the prey, a boy who was abused and thrown to the wayside by cruel and merciless human predators, that was forced to freeze and boil as his own kind enjoyed the comfort of their homes. Once he had lived amongst predators, he fully embraced the role of predator, learning from the wolves the most basic rules of the predator's role in the animal kingdom: kill or be killed. Hunt or starve. Take what you can to survive, no matter who it might hurt or who you're taking it from. And do so because you are a predator, and that is your right. To Lorne, the more predatory aspects of the human existence became the purest, and in his view, the trappings of our society have erroneously suppressed this component of our nature, which would explain why he views one of the greatest empires in human history that was supposedly founded by wolves as one of the only positive forms of society we've ever had, and to return whoever he can back to the sanctity of predatorhood, whilst hunting for prey at the same time, became his singular focus in life, furthering the idea that the world is a dog-eat-dog world with no rules, as he believes it to be. And indeed, accomplishing these things seems to be the only thing that Lorne lives for. So Lorne became a hitman, not just so he'd have easy access to murder, but so he could fund any endeavors he'd like to undertake that involved making those who had made him suffer more than he had, and also so he could have access to all the tools he would need to walk unhindered in a dangerous world where predators like Lorne would always be hunted by those looking to cage him. Something that drives this notion home is Lorne's appearance and eating habits. Lorne is very skinny, and considering the only time we see him eating, he's chowing down on some broccoli, cauliflower, and egg whites, we can assume that he isn't too fond of eating more than he needs to provide his body with basic nutrients. Why this is noteworthy as far as his motivations are concerned has to do with something that Lou Salverson points out during his conversation with Lorne. Here, Lou recounts a story of a case of mass murder that he was on back in 1979 in Sioux Falls, stating that there were so many bodies that if you stack them on top of one another, they'd reach the second floor of a building. He says that he'd call it animal, but animals only kill for food. This is a fantastic point to make when applying this line of thinking to Lorne's actions. Unlike a predator animal, Lorne the predator human doesn't actually need to kill in order to fill his stomach. So why does he do it? Some killers like Lorne do it for the thrill, others do it for sexual gratification, and others still do it for the pleasure that doling out carnage brings them. For Lorne Malvo, the reason why he does what he does is because it nourishes his soul and sates his true hunger. So Lorne Malvo only eats the bare minimum that he needs to stave off malnutrition, saving all the gratification that comes with filling one's stomach for what really matters, drinking the life force of others as he corrupts or torments all who he encounters, who he chooses to let live. Recording the most pivotal moments of his conquests on tapes for later consumption, when he's forced to wait for a time between meals. What seems strange about Lorne's preferred method of satisfying his need to kill and corrupt, though, is that in the moments when Lorne is doing so, or when he's alone with himself and able to listen to these tapes, he only ever cracks the faintest of smiles when he manages to do so. Now typically he's rather stiff in the way he conducts himself, moving little and expressing less as he's speaking to others. And as much as an absence of emotion is everyone's true resting point, typically when a person is engaged in an activity they enjoy, there's a decent expression of emotion that accompanies such activities. So does Lorne actually enjoy what he does to others? Yes and no. It doesn't matter that he never outwardly expresses joy in these moments, as it's more than enough to know that Lorne lives his life for the thrill of the hunt, and fulfilling such a hunt doubtlessly comes with a certain amount of gratification. It's true that a man like Lorne, who is a psychopath with stunted emotions, might have significant difficulty truly expressing any emotions, let alone joy. But for Lorne the wolf, it's more than that. Just like eating food isn't necessarily something he does so he can derive pleasure from the taste of things, he doesn't necessarily kill, corrupt, or take from others for gratification either. He does it because he needs to. Wolves don't find overt joy in killing. They do it because they need to do it to survive. A wolf doesn't laugh or crack a smile when it nabs its next meal. It simply eats, and then moves on to the next one. This is what killing, corrupting, and tormenting others is for Lorne. Meals. And though we can see him expressing small amounts of joy at certain points in the story like I stated earlier, I imagine that just like a wolf who might be overjoyed when it manages to take down its target, the joy that Lorne feels here more so stems from his fulfillment of his designs in that moment, and the hunt itself, rather than full-on pleasure from the results of said hunt. All of these things have made Lorne into a master of murder, a killer who has such a high level of intelligence that nearly every situation he's in, he always comes out on top. And with the resources provided to him by his profession, Lorne is able to mold himself to any situation in any way he might need in order to always stay 2 steps ahead of his quarry. Now, in his efforts to become the ultimate hunter, Lorne has become the embodiment of the classic phrase, a wolf in sheep's clothing. For though Lorne is every bit a wolf on the inside, he is extraordinarily adept at appearing to be an ordinary human being. His haircut might be a bit strange and off-putting, but Lorne is otherwise fully capable of blending into society and adapting himself to any situation he finds himself in. And we see Lorne at different points in this story effectively playing a lawyer, a pastor, and a dentist complete with the qualifications to conduct dental work. When Lorne is playing a human, he's a very convincing human, and his semi-awkward gait and relatively inoffensive appearance does much to disarm others and earn their trust. What's so utterly terrifying about Lorne, though, is that any facade he puts on is just that, a very well-crafted facade, one that he can drop in an instant to reveal the monster he is underneath. Many people in this story comment on Lorne's eyes, saying that they're dead and devoid of warmth. But it's his ability to flip a switch, so to speak, that's more horrifying than the void behind his eyes. There are a couple times we've seen Lorne doing this, but the best example we're given is when he encounters Lester again in Vegas. At this point in time, Lorne is currently engaged in a deep cover operation wherein he's attempting to get in a man's good graces so he can assassinate his brother, who's currently in witness protection. After Lester spots him at a casino, he approaches Lorne and attempts to speak with him, and Lorne responds by feigning ignorance and telling Lester to drop it. But Lester foolishly follows Lorne into an elevator, and here Lorne proceeds to challenge Lester as to whether or not he actually wants to do this. That is to say, press the issue and force Lorne to acknowledge him and who he is. In this moment, Lorne had so far been keeping up a genial attitude in order to placate his entourage. But as Lester keeps pressing the issue, Lorne's face becomes a mask of intensity and morbid curiosity, amused that this upstart of his own creation is daring to tempt the hungry wolf. After Lester confirms that this is indeed what he wants, Lorne proceeds to murder the 3 people with him, one whom he'd even conned into being his fiancée, and he does so with only the slightest twitch of his eye, afterwards commenting on how Bert's face had that classic shock of terror on it when he pulled out his gun. Now, this is just one of the many examples of Lorne's absolute lack of mercy and empathy, but the intensity and animal-like curiosity he displays here can be found in nearly all interactions he has to a certain degree. But now it's time that we talk about the one thing that Lorne seems to enjoy above all others: corrupting and tormenting people. Perhaps being derived of all things human and decent for much of his life has made it so Lorne has an animal-like instinct for human suffering and how to exploit it. As in every instance where Lorne manages to corrupt someone, he does so by exploiting a weakness within them to coax them into going against any preconceived sensibilities they might have. And it should also be noted that as a student of institutions, as he claims to be, Lorne has a keen understanding of the human society that spurned him, that enables him to exploit people further by using the system to his advantage in so many different ways. When he meets Lester at the hospital, he's able to con him into halfway consenting to Lorne murdering Sam Hess, because Lester has been stepped on his entire life and has enormous pent-up rage and frustration roiling within him. He manages to convince a young man to urinate in his mother's car's gas tank, because this boy too has taken a verbal beating from his mother for what is likely many years, and it took just one small suggestion from Lorne to try and get back at her in any way he could. Corrupting others in this way also leans into Lorne's penchant for tormenting others too, as when he twists someone into a shadow of himself, they inevitably cause further torment to others, like when Lester murders his wife, causes the murder of the police chief Vern and his new wife Linda, and ruins the life of his brother Chaz in order to stay out of prison, or when the mystery man on one of his tapes is lamenting the fact that Lorne jumbled him up and ruined the lives of his family. Torment seems to be Lorne's overall goal when he's pursuing personal acts of terror, as it's ruining the lives of others as his was ruined. That seems to be his true goal when corrupting others, as corruption is only another method that he uses to destroy lives. Part of the reason I think this is the case is because the tapes Lorne has collected are made the moment someone has reached a point where his corruption has ruined their lives, and they're experiencing extreme torment as a result. Lester's tape consists of the turmoil he's experiencing after he's murdered his wife. The tape of the mystery man I mentioned earlier is similar in nature to Lester's tape. The tape we see him making of the conversation between Don and Stavros is made at the culmination of his blackmail plot, when Stavros is at his most vulnerable and terrified. And outside of corrupting others, when we see Lorne interacting with people in a negative way, he's typically tormenting them in some way, pestering a woman at a motel about her policies, and then alerting her to the misdeed that he just coaxed her son into committing, calling the son of a man he just killed, and convincing him that his dad was leaving all of his money to his younger brother, torturing a man by killing his dog, drugging him, sending manufactured plagues to his home and business, and even covertly alluding to the fact that he killed his dog by recounting a story of when he had to kill a dog in the past to him. He also tapes a man to an exercise bike and kills a couple innocent people, so he's forced to die by cop, and he listens to the entire thing on a police scanner. And as I've already mentioned, he also tells some kids that people were murdered in the house they live in and that it might be haunted. Everything Lorne does to people is always geared toward causing them some sort of misery that he can either witness or record to experience again later on. And Lorne does all he can to ruin people's perception of the world and bring their spirits down whenever possible, if not outright cause them physical harm or death in the process. While this is Lorne's preferred method of obtaining his meals, he's also more than happy to murder anyone at the drop of a hat with a finesse and confidence that shows us in so many ways ways that Lorne is perhaps one of the most skilled and deadliest assassins who ever lived. And while he doesn't get as much satisfaction from outright murdering someone as he does when he's able to play with them beforehand, I'm sure it's a nice little snack for the wolf when he can't find a better target to sate his desires, especially when those kills are the result of a vendetta, as Lorne isn't above seeking revenge on others when he feels the need to, like when he massacres an entire gang based out of Fargo in retaliation for sending 2 men to kill him. And there's no telling how many dozens or hundreds of people Lorne has put down over the course of his life, whether that be professionally or personally. Now, throughout this video, I've been putting forth the notion that Lorne is more so meant to be seen as a predatory animal than anything, but I've seen a lot of people compare Lorne and his actions to the devil, and in many ways, that's an apt comparison to make, as there are a few references strewn throughout this story that point us towards this conclusion, like Lorne's Garden of Eden comment when he's eating a piece of loose pie, or this particularly devilish imagery during the elevator scene. When you consider that the devil was the original predator and brought sin and ruin to our species by engaging in many of the nefarious activities we see Lorne partaking in, this comparison does make a lot of sense. While these illusions are certainly present, and Lorne might take some inspiration from the devil when playing with his food, I think a man who's so ingrained in animalistic behavior and ways of thinking, to the point that he'd even attempt to dominate another man by nonchalantly defecating in front of him, is more so meant to be seen as an animal with devilish inclinations rather than the devil himself. Even so, Lorne is terrifyingly evil, and to compare him to the source of all evil is more than appropriate. But now that we've discussed all the important aspects of Lorne's character, all that's left to discuss is how his story ends. And this ending clues us in on a central part of who Lorne is. As I've already mentioned, early on in this story when Lorne is arrested by Gus and then subsequently released, he asks him why the human eye can see more shades of green than any other color. And the answer is because our primate ancestors needed to be able to differentiate the different shades to better spot predators. While this was Lorne's answer to Gus's question of why he could lie so easily, it planted a seed in Gus's mind that, like every other seed Lorne plants in people's mind, changed his perspective of the world and himself, giving him the opportunity to unlock his inner predator, like Lester unlocked his. Now, when Lorne goes to visit Mr. Wrench in the hospital, one of the hitmen who was sent to kill him, he decided to release him so he wouldn't go to prison, and he does so because he and his partner had gotten closer to killing him than anyone else ever had. And if he was still sore about what happened, Lorne implores him to come and find him when he heals up so he can settle the score. But why would a man give another man who has a good reason to want to kill him an advantage in doing so? Because Lorne, for all the ways he can satisfy his urge for violence and torture, is bored. Lorne is the top dog in his world, a perfect predator who can outgame any prey or predator that he encounters. But what's the fun in staying top dog forever? Any man who's at the pinnacle of his game and never receives a worthy challenge is bound to grow bored with their supremacy, and Lorne Malvo had become such a man. So when he turns people like Lester or Gus into predators, or allows other predators to roam free, he's always looking to torment them, yes, but deep down, he also hopes that they'll one day pose a worthy challenge to him, a predator with which he can do battle that will offer him more than a few seconds of heat-of-the-moment thrills. But Lorne also wants to go out on his own terms. As in one of his animal stories that I omitted earlier, Lorne talks about a bear he saw in Alaska that had been caught in a steel trap. This bear chewed through bloody bone to get out of said trap, but it died in a stream about an hour later. However, Lorne adds that at least he went out on his own terms. Now, Lorne also seems like a man who wants to go out on his own terms, and giving another person the capability to murder you at some point might not seem like going out on your own terms, but it certainly is when you consider he was the one who gave them that capability, opening up the possibility that they would create for him a game worth playing that he could lose with dignity. For in the animal kingdom, there are no winners or losers, only breakfast and dinner, and that's why after being trapped by Lester, and Gus confronts him at the end of this story, there's no begging, no pleas for mercy, just that same Lorne Malvo stoicism as 3 shots are fired into his abdomen. And even with the incredible pain he's in, this animal of pure terror and drive manages to look up at a predator he's created and offer him a smile as blood spills over his lips. For Lorne Malvo, just like the bear who gnawed its leg free from a trap, was an animal till the end. A creature that would never back down in the face of the greatest pain or death itself, and continue walking on until the last breath left his body. So in the end, who was Lorne Malvo? He was a man who likely had a life harder than most of us could ever imagine. A man who was forced as a child to endure abuse, abandonment, and a survival of the fittest scenario amongst the company of wolves. Taking the horrors he'd experienced at human hands to heart, Lorne adopted a worldview where only 3 things mattered: predators, prey, and the hunt. And he made it his life's goal to become the most terrifying predator the world had ever seen, both so he could satisfy the desires he developed during his time among the wolves, and so he could return tenfold the pain and suffering that the world had inflicted upon him. Over the course of his long career, Lorne would orchestrate the death and suffering of countless innocents, and the torment and misery of who knows how many more. And while we can find much sympathy for a man who was turned into such a monster, Lorne, when it comes down to it, is a monster. An animal of sly cunning and merciless brutality, who's made a comfortable home for himself in a den of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Lorne? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.